This isn't a costume party. Take that uniform off, or we'll take it off for you." The threat rang out as the young woman was cornered in the hall. All eyes turned to her, just an ordinary woman, quiet in an unfamiliar military uniform. But when she was forced to unbutton her jacket, revealing a special tattoo directly over her heart, those who had been loudest suddenly fell silent. Who was she? And why did one tattoo make an entire general freeze in place? Riley Shaw, 32, former Special Operations Officer with Ghost Operations, a unit specializing in classified missions, filed under the category of non-existent after a psychologically devastating campaign. Riley was discharged in silence, disappearing from the military radar, living quietly in civilian obscurity. But an anonymous invitation from the Department of Defense had pulled her back to attend the memorial ceremony for Operation Phantom Crest, the mission that had taken her teammates in a piece of her soul. Before stepping into the hall, she clutched tightly in her palm an old chipped coin, a memento from the teammate who had fallen during that operation. She wore this uniform for him, for those who would never have the chance to wear it again. The Ghost Operations tattoo over her heart felt like it was burning. Riley wore her old uniform, no clear insignia, no nameplate, only the faded Ghost Operations tattoo over her left breast, serving as proof of a past she could never forget. The ceremony was being held in the Pentagon's most prestigious hall, where portraits of decorated heroes lined marble walls beneath crystal chandeliers. This was where the nation honored its finest, where families gathered to remember sacrifice, where stories of courage were told with pride in the grand hall, where generals, senior officers, and high-ranking officials gathered. Her quiet appearance immediately drew suspicious glances. She looked out of place among the polished uniforms adorned with ribbons, medals, and rank insignia that told clear stories of service and achievement. Her plain uniform bore no visible decorations, no indicators of rank, no unit patches that anyone could recognize. Riley stood near the back wall, her posture military straight. Despite years of civilian life, the old coin pressed into her palm, warm from her grip, served as a constant reminder of why she was here. Around her, conversations buzzed about deployments, commendations, and operations that could be publicly acknowledged, proud stories of heroism that families could understand, that history books could record, that the media could celebrate. She listened to their tales of courage, all worthy, all important. But none of them knew about the missions that happened in rooms without windows, in countries that didn't appear on official maps, with objectives that were classified beyond most security clearances. Riley's eyes drifted to the memorial wall, lined with photos of fallen heroes. Hundreds of faces stared back, all honored, all remembered, all able to have their stories told to their families and recorded for posterity. But there were other faces, missing faces that would haunt her forever. Marcus, who died holding a door against insurgents so she could complete the mission. Sarah, whose last words were coordinates that saved an entire village. David, whose family was told he died in a training accident because the truth was too dangerous to reveal. Their sacrifices were just as real, just as meaningful as those honored on the wall. But their stories would die with the few who knew them, buried under layers of classification that would never be lifted. The weight of the tattoo over her heart seemed to press against her chest, such a small mark. Yet it carried the memory of every Ghost Operations member who had made the ultimate sacrifice in complete anonymity. "Excuse me, ma'am." A security officer approached, clipboard in hand, eyeing her uniform with obvious suspicion. "I don't see your name on the guest list." Riley remained silent, her fingers tightening around the old coin she'd learned long ago, that some truths were too classified to speak even to defend yourself. Other attendees began to notice the commotion, whispers spreading through the gathering. "Who is she? I don't recognize that unit designation. Should someone be wearing a uniform without proper identification?" Riley stood quietly, carrying the weight of secrets that could never be shared, representing comrades who could never be named. The security officer stepped closer, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed in this sacred space. Ma'am, I need to see proper identification and authorization to wear that uniform. Riley remained silent, her expression calm. The old coin pressed deeper into her palm, its edges cutting slightly into her skin. The whispers around them grew louder, drawing more attention. "Look at her uniform," a young female officer said with a dismissive laugh. "No ribbons, no rank, no unit patches, probably bought it online. Another stolen valor case," a decorated colonel muttered to his companion. "They get bolder every year." Riley breathed out slowly of all the ways she could have died during her service. She thought darkly. She never imagined dying of dress code violations would be one of them. The security officer's partner joined them, eyeing Riley's plain appearance with obvious disdain. "Ma'am, you're disrupting a solemn ceremony. If you can't provide proper credentials, you need to leave immediately." A small crowd had begun to form around the commotion. Senior officers, Pentagon officials, and honored guests all craned their necks to see what was happening. "This is embarrassing." Someone whispered security should have caught this at the door. Who let her in here? Riley felt the familiar weight of invisible chains, the burden of carrying classified secrets that made it impossible to defend herself. She could tell them about ghost operations, about the missions that had prevented terrorist attacks, stopped wars before they started, saved thousands of lives. But those stories weren't hers to tell. They belonged to national security, locked away in files that would remain classified for decades. The security supervisor appeared drawn by the growing disturbance. His face was red with authority and barely controlled anger. "Ma'am, I'm ordering you to remove that uniform immediately." "This isn't a costume party," his partner added with cruel satisfaction. "Take that uniform off, or we'll take it off for you." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Riley could feel the stares of everyone around her, could hear the whispered judgments, could sense the collective assumption that she was some kind of fraud seeking attention. She thought about complying. It would be easier to walk away. Change clothes, disappear back into the civilian world where her service record was just another classified file gathering dust in some Pentagon basement. But then she felt the coin in her palm warm from her grip. Marcus's coin, the last thing he'd pressed into her hand before he'd made his final stand. "Don't let them forget us," he'd whispered with his dying breath. Riley straightened her shoulders, her military bearing returning despite the humiliation remove it. Now the supervisor commanded, his voice echoing through the hall. "You're dishonoring every real service member in this room." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Here she stood being accused of dishonoring service members when she'd given more to her country than most of the people condemning her could ever imagine. Just then, General Morrison was engaged in conversation with a group of Pentagon officials near the front of the hall. The four-star general had spent 30 years in service, had overseen classified operations that kept America safe, had read briefings that would give most people nightmares. He was discussing budget allocations for intelligence operations when the commotion near the back caught his peripheral vision. Curious about the disturbance, General Morrison excused himself and began walking toward the crowd as he approached. He could hear the security supervisor's harsh demands. "I said, remove that jacket now." Riley's hands moved slowly to the buttons of her uniform jacket. Each movement felt like a betrayal of everything she'd fought for, everything her teammates had died for. But she had no choice as the first button came undone. Then the second, the jacket began to open. General Morrison pushed through the crowd, intent on understanding what was disrupting the solemn ceremony. The third button, the fourth, Riley's jacket fell open, revealing the faded tattoo directly over her heart. General Morrison's eyes locked onto the mark, and his entire world shifted. It wasn't just ink. It wasn't just decoration. It was the Ghost Operations emblem, a silver skull on black wings. A symbol he'd seen in classified briefings so secret that most people in government didn't know they existed. The whole world around him seemed to disappear. He wasn't just seeing a symbol. He was seeing classified reports he'd read at midnight casualty numbers. He was never allowed to speak aloud. Mission successes that had saved thousands of lives, but had to be buried forever. His face went pale. He stopped walking, stopped breathing. Ghost, oops. He whispered, barely audible but loud enough for those nearby to hear. The atmosphere in the hall changed instantly. Those who recognized the name fell silent. Those who didn't sense something profound had just happened. Riley stood there, jacket open, the tattoo over her heart, visible to everyone. The mark that proved she'd served an operation so classified. Most people in this room didn't have clearance to know they existed. They demanded she remove her uniform. But they had no idea what they were about to see. Carried more honor than every medal in this room combined, because it was carved directly over her heart. Where is true honor? Kept on the shining medals everyone can see, or in a permanent symbol that only the worthy are allowed to know. Comment heart if you believe some legacies aren't just written in history, but carved into flesh. General Morrison pushed through the crowd with the urgency of someone who had just witnessed something that changed everything. The security supervisor was still barking orders, oblivious to the transformation that had just occurred. I said, "Strip that uniform, you're making a mockery of." Stop! General Morrison's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. Every person in the immediate vicinity fell silent. The authority in that single word carried the weight of 30 years of command of decisions that had shaped national security, of secrets that could topple governments. The security supervisor turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption, until he saw the 4 stars on Morrison's uniform. His face immediately shifted from arrogance to confusion. "Sir, this woman is wearing an unauthorized uniform. She has no identification, no unit designation. We can verify she's clearly... What Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet as he stepped closer to Riley. The general's eyes never left the Ghost Operations tattoo over her heart. The silver skull on black wings, faded but unmistakable to anyone who had been briefed on operations that existed in 2008. The deepest shadows of national security, says she's clearly impersonating military personnel. The supervisor continued, his confidence wavering under Morrison's intense stare. Morrison turned to face the growing crowd, his expression grave when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the immediate area. "This woman is not impersonating anyone. She has more right to wear that uniform than most people in this room." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Confused glances were exchanged. The decorated officers who had been mocking Riley moments before now looked uncertain. The general continued, his voice growing stronger. "She didn't just earn the right to wear that uniform. She earned it in places most of us have never been on missions. Most of us will never know about serving a country that will never be allowed to thank her publicly." Riley stood perfectly still. Her jacket still open, the tattoo visible to everyone. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely relieved. For the first time in years, someone with authority was acknowledging what she and her teammates had sacrificed. Morrison gestured toward the memorial wall lined with photos of honored fallen soldiers. "Every face on that wall represents heroism and sacrifice that we can celebrate openly. But there are other heroes whose faces will never hang there. Not because their service was less meaningful, but because acknowledging it would compromise operations that are still protecting American lives today." The young female officer who had suggested Riley bought her uniform online looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The decorated colonel who had muttered about stolen valor was studying his own shoes with intense concentration. Morrison stepped closer to Riley, his voice dropping to a respectful tone that carried clearly in the now silent hall. "Ma'am, I've read the classified after-action reports, Operation Phantom Crest, the mission that officially never happened in a country we were never supposed to be in, against a threat that the public will never know existed." Riley's grip tightened on Marcus's coin. She could feel tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but her military bearing held firm. 18 terrorists planning to detonate chemical weapons in 3 major American cities. Morrison continued his words, causing visible shock among those close enough to hear, stopped by a 4-person Ghost Operations team. 3 team members lost 1 survivor who completed the mission and saved an estimated 50,000 American lives. The silence in the hall was deafening. The magnitude of what Morrison was revealing, even in vague terms, was sinking in among the gathered officials. Riley found her voice for the first time since the confrontation began. "General, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," Morrison interrupted firmly, "because what happened here today cannot happen again. Ever." He turned back to the crowd, his expression transforming from respectful to commanding. Ghost operations exist. They operate in the spaces between countries, in the shadows, between policies, in the silence between headlines. They do the work that keeps the rest of us safe enough to sleep at night. Morrison's next action shocked everyone present. He came to attention and rendered a formal military salute, not the standard salute, but the special recognition salute reserved for Ghost operations personnel. A salute most people in the room had never seen before. "Ma'am," he said clearly, "it has been an honor." The effect was immediate and profound. Every uniformed person within sight snapped to attention and followed their general's lead. The same people who had been questioning Riley's right to wear a uniform were now offering her the highest military honor possible. The security supervisor, who had threatened to strip off her uniform, looked like he was reconsidering his entire career path. Riley returned the salute with precision that spoke of years of training, years of service, years of sacrifice that most would never understand. "General Morrison," she said as she lowered her salute. "Yes, ma'am." Riley reached into her pocket and withdrew the old chipped coin. She held it up so he could see it. "This belonged to Marcus Chin. He died holding a door so I could complete the Phantom Quest mission. His family was told he died in a training accident." Morrison's expression softened with understanding and deep respect. The other 2, Sarah Williams and David Rodriguez, Sarah died, providing cover fire during extraction. David died protecting intelligence that prevented the follow-up attacks. Their families don't know what they really died. 4. The weight of her words settled over the gathering like a heavy blanket. These weren't just statistics or classified reports. These were real people who had made the ultimate sacrifice in complete anonymity. Morrison nodded solemnly. "They will be honored appropriately within the constraints of operational security." "Thank you, sir." As Riley buttoned her jacket back up, covering the tattoo that had changed everything, Morrison addressed the crowd one final time. "Let this be a lesson to everyone here. The most dangerous assumption we can make is that we can judge someone's service by what we can see on their uniform. Some of our greatest heroes wear the plainest clothes and carry the deepest scars." He paused, letting his words sink in. Respect is not earned by ribbons and medals. It's earned by service sacrifice and the willingness to do what's necessary when no one is watching and no one will ever know. Riley walked toward the exit, her path clearing as personnel stepped aside with newfound respect. As she reached the door, she turned back one final time. "The ceremony can continue now," she said simply. "They've been honored." As she disappeared into the corridor beyond the hall, remained silent for a long moment, everyone processing what they had just witnessed. The memorial ceremony resumed, but it would never be the same today. They had learned that some heroes walk among them in silence, carrying burdens too heavy for public acknowledgement, honored only by those who understand the true cost of freedom. News of the Ghost operations woman spread through military channels like wildfire across dry plains. Within hours, every major Pentagon department had heard the story of the quiet woman in the plain uniform who had been publicly honored by General Morrison for service that officially never happened. The young female officer who had suggested Riley bought her uniform online spent the following week researching everything she could access about classified operations. The limited information available only reinforced how much remained hidden. How many heroes served without recognition? She submitted a formal letter requesting transfer to intelligence services determined to serve with the same quiet dignity she had witnessed. The decorated colonel who had muttered about stolen valor found himself unable to sleep for 3 nights. He finally wrote a personal letter to his own commanding officer, requesting that all personnel under his command receive additional training on recognizing and respecting veterans of classified units. The security supervisor who had threatened to strip Riley's uniform was quietly reassigned to a new position. His new job title was Archive Maintenance Specialist. Essentially, he spent his days dusting file cabinets labeled classified in the Pentagon's basement storage facility. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved in the reassignment. General Morrison took immediate action to prevent similar incidents within 2 weeks. He had established new protocols throughout the Pentagon. Discrete identification systems were created for veterans of classified units, allowing them to attend appropriate ceremonies without compromising operational security. More importantly, he ordered mandatory sensitivity training for all security personnel. The training included case studies about the existence of classified units and the importance of treating every individual with basic respect, regardless of their appearance or documentation. A small Euro-secured memorial space was created within the Pentagon itself. Not a public display, but a quiet room accessible only to those with the highest clearances. Inside a simple black granite wall bore no names, no faces, no specific details, just a series of small emblems representing units that had served in complete secrecy. The Ghost Operations emblem was etched in silver near the center, surrounded by symbols from other units that existed in the shadows below. The emblems, a single inscription read to those who served in silence, died in darkness and live in memory. 3 months after the incident, General Morrison received an unexpected visitor. A middle-aged woman in civilian clothes approached his office, introducing herself as Colonel Patricia Hayes, retired from military intelligence. She had heard about what happened through the network of quiet professionals who understood the world. Riley inhabited General Colonel Hayes said, settling into the offered chair. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did that day." Morrison looked puzzled. "Ma'am, I simply did what was right." "You did more than that. You gave voice to something that most of us carry in silence, the knowledge that our service mattered even if it can never be acknowledged publicly." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "There are more of us out there than most people realize, veterans of units that don't exist, officially, survivors of missions that never happened. We live quiet lives asking for nothing more than the basic respect every citizen deserves." The colonel paused, choosing her words carefully. "What you did that day, the way you handled it, it's given hope to an entire community of people who thought they'd been forgotten by the institution they served after she left." Morrison found himself reflecting on the broader implications of that confrontation. He realized that the most important security wasn't about protecting classified information or preventing unauthorized access. It was about protecting the dignity of those who had sacrificed everything for their country, asking for nothing in return except the basic human respect that every person deserves. The lesson had been learned, and it would continue to ripple through the military community for years to come. True, honor doesn't require press conferences or public ceremonies. Sometimes it's carried quietly over the heart in ink that tells stories too dangerous to speak aloud, worn by people who ask for nothing more than the right to live normal lives after extraordinary service. Riley Shaw never sought recognition for her years in ghost operations, neither did Marcus, Sarah, or David. They understood that some battles are fought not for glory, but because someone has to fight them in the spaces where light cannot reach. The tattoo over her heart had always been more than decoration. It was a covenant with the fallen, a promise that their sacrifice would be remembered even when it couldn't be acknowledged. It was proof that she had stood in rooms that didn't exist, completed missions that never happened, saved lives that would never know her name that day at the memorial ceremony, surrounded by accusations and demands, to strip away the only recognition her service would ever receive. Riley had faced a choice every veteran of classified operations knows intimately. She could have walked away, endured the humiliation. in silence, disappeared back into the anonymity that the government preferred for people like her. Instead, her quiet dignity in the face of ignorance had become a teaching moment, not through demands or protests, but through the simple act of standing her ground, while carrying secrets too heavy for most people to comprehend. The ripple effects continued long after she left that hall. General Morrison's new protocols were adopted by military facilities across 4 countries. The cultural shift he'd initiated spread through professional networks, creating new understanding about how to recognize and respect those who serve in shadows. Training programs now included scenarios about veterans of classified units' military personnel. Learned that the most dangerous assumption was believing they could judge someone's worth by their visible achievements. 6 months after the incident, Riley received a package with no return address. Inside was a simple black challenge coin bearing the Ghost Operations emblem, along with a handwritten note from Marcus, Sarah, and David. Their watches ended, but their honor endures. Thank you for carrying them home. It was unsigned, but Riley knew it came from someone in the invisible network of quiet professionals who understood that some recognition happens in darkness, away from cameras and ceremonies. She placed the coin on her dresser next to a faded photograph. Marcus, Sarah, David, and herself taken during a rare moment of levity between missions, all of them young, brave, unaware of the sacrifices that lay ahead. Some legacies are measured in monuments and medals that gleam under spotlights. Others are measured in moments when ordinary people choose to treat strangers with dignity, even when they don't understand the weight those strangers carry. The most powerful honors aren't always visible. Sometimes they're memories of service carried quietly by people who served in places that don't exist, for reasons that can't be explained, asking only for the basic respect every human deserves. And sometime then, when the world forgets to offer that respect, a simple tattoo over the heart can remind them what true honor looks like. Subscribe Iron Heart Stories. If you believe real legacies live quietly under the uniform under the skin,